Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are rediving deep into some truly fascinating stories that have been tucked away in the corners of American history. These aren't the tales you typically hear about in school, but they're incredibly important and reveal a side of the past that's often overlooked. Let us start with a story that sounds like it's straight out of a science fiction movie, Operation Paperclip. After World War II ended, the United States was in a race against the Soviet Union, not just for political influence, but for technological dominance. This race became known as the Cold War. As part of this, the U.S. government launched a secret program to recruit top German scientists, many of whom had worked for the previous regime. The goal was to harness their expertise for America's own strategic advantage, particularly in rocketry and aerospace engineering. Over 1,600 German scientists and their families were brought to the United States. One of the most famous figures from this operation was Wernher von Braun. He went from developing rockets during the war to becoming a pivotal architect of NASA's Apollo program. It was his team that designed the Saturn V rocket, the massive vehicle that ultimately carried astronauts to the moon. It's a complex part of history, showing how geopolitical rivalries can lead to extraordinary, and sometimes morally complicated, alliances in the pursuit of progress. The legacy of Operation Paperclip is still debated today, but there is no denying its profound impact on the space race and the technological landscape of the 20th century. Now, let us switch gears and talk about a project that is shrouded in even more secrecy, Project MKUltra. This was a CIA program that began in the early 1950s, born out of fears during the Cold War about mind control techniques. The agency was concerned that other countries might have developed ways to control human behavior, and they wanted to know if they could do it too, for both offensive and defensive purposes. The experiments conducted under MKUltra were extensive and highly unethical. They explored hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and the use of various substances to see if they could influence or break the human mind. The project was incredibly secretive, and much of what we know today comes from documents that survived in order to be destroyed in the 1970s. When the program was finally exposed, it led to widespread public outrage and congressional hearings. The story of MKUltra serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the ethical lines that should never be crossed, even in the name of national security. It's a dark chapter, but one that's crucial to understanding the complexities of intelligence operations during that era. Let's journey back a bit further in time, to the Roaring Twenties and the era of Prohibition. You probably know about the nationwide ban on alcohol, but have you heard about the government's role in making some of that illegal alcohol deadly? It's a shocking story. To enforce prohibition, the government required that industrial-grade alcohol used in things like solvents and fuels be denatured, meaning it had to be mixed with toxic chemicals to make it undrinkable. As bootleggers started stealing this industrial alcohol and repurifying it for illegal sale, federal officials decided to make the denaturing formulas even more poisonous. They added substances like kerosene, chloroform, and even more methyl alcohol, a highly toxic chemical. The idea was to scare people away from drinking bootleg liquor, but it had a tragic and fatal consequence. Thousands of people died from drinking this poisoned alcohol, and many more were left with permanent injuries like blindness. It was a controversial and deadly public health experiment that highlighted the extreme and sometimes devastating measures taken to enforce a law that a large part of the population openly defied. Now, let's talk about something that feels a bit closer to home, affecting the very food we eat. Have you ever heard of the government cheese program? This isn't a conspiracy theory, it was a real thing. In the latter half of the 20th century, the U.S. government found itself with a massive surplus of dairy products, particularly cheese. This was a result of government price support policies for dairy farmers. To deal with this literal mountain of cheese at one point, it was over £1 billion stored in warehouses across the country. The government decided to give it away. Starting in the 1980s, blocks of this processed cheese were distributed to low-income families, the elderly, and schools through various welfare programs. It was officially called pasteurized processed American cheese, but everyone just called it government cheese. For millions of Americans, it became a staple food item and a symbol of hard times. While the program helped prevent waste and provided food to those in need, it also highlighted some of the strange and unexpected outcomes of agricultural policy. It's a fascinating example of how government intervention in the economy can lead to some very unusual solutions. From cheese, we move to a story of civil rights and quiet rebellion. You might know about Rosa Parks, but have you heard of Claudette Colvin? 9 months before Rosa Parks' famous act of defiance on a Montgomery bus, a 15-year-old high school student named Claudette Colvin did the exact same thing. On March 2, 1955, she refused to give up her seat to a white passenger. She was arrested and charged. Claudette was young, outspoken, and passionate. Her case was initially considered by civil rights leaders as a potential legal challenge to segregation laws. However, they ultimately decided against it, worrying that a young, emotional teenager wouldn't be the ideal face for their movement. Later, when Rosa Parks, a respected secretary for the NAACP, was arrested, they rallied behind her. Claudette Colvin's story was largely forgotten by mainstream history for decades. However, She was one of the 4 plaintiffs in the Browder v. Gale case, the lawsuit that ultimately led the Supreme Court to declare bus segregation unconstitutional. Her story is a powerful reminder that history is filled with unsung heroes, and that the fight for justice is often waged by many, not just the few who become famous. Finally, let's look up at the sky. We've all seen planes, but have you ever heard of the U-2 spy plane? During the height of the Cold War, the US needed a way to monitor the Soviet Union's military activities without being detected. The answer was the U-2, a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft designed to fly at 70,000 feet, far above the reach of Soviet fighter jets and anti-aircraft missiles. For years, the U-2 program, codenamed Operation Overflight, was a closely guarded secret. The government publicly claimed these were just weather research planes. This cover story held up until May 1, 1960, when a U-2 plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union. The US initially stuck to its cover story, but the Soviets then revealed they had captured the pilot alive and recovered much of the plane's surveillance equipment. It was a huge international incident and a major embarrassment for the United States. The U-2 story reveals the incredible lengths nations will go to for intelligence and the high-stakes cat-and-mouse game that defined the Cold War. The technology was groundbreaking, but the political fallout was immense. These stories, from secret science projects and mind control experiments to poisoned alcohol, government cheese, unsung heroes, and spy planes, are just a few examples of the incredible events that have shaped the world we live in, often without us even knowing it. They show that history is much more complex, strange, and fascinating than we often imagine. Thanks so much for watching today. If you found these stories as interesting as I do, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Let me know in the comments which of these stories surprised you the most. See you in the next video.